It all started just a week ago, but it's been playing on a loop in my mind ever since. My family isn't your average holiday crew. While most people spend their winter vacations relaxing somewhere warm or heading to ski resorts, my relatives prefer something different. Every year, we rent a huge, isolated cabin deep in the Vermont woods. This year's spot looked like a log fortress, sturdy, sprawling, and perfect for our unusual traditions. That's where things took a strange turn. One of our favorite, and admittedly dangerous, family rituals is a giant game of laser tag, not in some backyard, but in the pitch-black forest. Every second to last night of the trip, the adults suit up in thick winter gear, grab heavy-duty laser guns handcrafted by my Uncle Wyatt, and disappear into the snow-covered wilderness for a no-holds-barred showdown. Yes, it's exactly as wild as it sounds. The game is simple. Last person not tagged wins the cash prize and bragging rights until next year. If multiple players survive until midnight, they split the winnings. Once you're hit, you return to the fire pit near the cabin and wait. When the second to last player returns, everyone fires their real guns into the sky to signal the game's end. Safe? Probably not. But tradition is tradition. This was my first year playing. I just turned 18, and I was pumped. Not for the money, but just to finally be part of the madness. Before we started, Uncle Wyatt gave us the rundown: how to use the equipment, where to aim, and the rules. Then, without warning, he sprinted into the woods like a lunatic. Everyone scattered. Most of them ran uphill, so I figured I'd head downhill, less traffic, better odds. The snow on the ground gave just enough visibility. I wandered deep into the forest and found a small ridge where I could catch my breath and scout the area. After resting, I started creeping sideways along the hill, trying to loop around and surprise someone. I must have walked for 15 minutes, putting serious distance between me and the cabin. Then I heard a soft crunch footsteps behind me. I ducked behind a tree. At first, I didn't see anyone, but then, straining my eyes, I spotted a faint trail of footprints leading to a thick tree, maybe 15 yards away. Someone was there, hiding, watching. But why hadn't they tagged me? I had been completely exposed. That's when I started to feel genuinely uneasy. I took off uphill, trying to put distance between me and whoever that was. But soon, I saw another set of footprints. These started deep in the woods, looped toward me, then vanished back into the trees. Someone had flanked me, and they'd gone even deeper than I had. Then I heard a thud like someone falling in the snow. I bolted back toward the cabin. My phone said it was past 11 p.m. Time had flown. I followed some fresh prints leading toward the house and picked up the pace. Just past a line of trees, I spotted my cousin Drew walking casually with his laser gun. I ducked, aimed, and got him. His marker lit up. He groaned, slammed his hand on a tree, and sulked off toward the cabin. I grinned, proud of my first kill. High on adrenaline, I came up with a plan. I'd sprint forward, then double back and hide in a spot where my footprints would mislead anyone following me. Classic bait and switch. I executed it perfectly, hiding behind a tree without leaving obvious tracks. I waited. Suddenly, my marker blinked. I'd been hit. But how? The laser beam was coming from the spot I'd just left. Someone had tracked me. I stood up, expecting the shooter to turn off their laser and reveal themselves. But they didn't. The beam stayed pointed directly at me. It felt wrong, like they were taunting me. I started walking toward the beam. All I could see was a pair of hands holding the laser gun. The body was hidden behind a tree. Just then, gunshots rang out in the distance. The signal that the game was over. But if I'd been tagged and Drew was the last person I hit who tagged me, that's when the shooter stepped into view. I didn't recognize them. A total stranger. And standing next to them, another stranger. Before I could react, I heard crunching behind me. I spun around and saw a man in a ski mask holding a knife in one hand and a trash bag in the other.
He locked eyes with me and charged.
I ran, screaming, dropped everything. I could hear all three of them chasing me, shouting words I couldn't even recognize as English. The snow slowed me down, but I didn't dare stop or look back. I was running for my life. Finally, I saw the lights of the cabin. I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs shaking, and that's when I saw Uncle Wyatt. He came running from the clearing with a rifle in hand. He raised it and fired 3 shots into the air. I heard someone behind me stumble and fall. Then silence. I collapsed at Wyatt's feet and passed out in the snow. The next morning, my aunt explained that she had dropped her laser gun during the game after a fall, which explained how the strangers got their hands on it. Drew had apparently tagged 6 people before I got him, so he really was the final kill. Uncle Wyatt and my dad searched the woods that night but found nothing. Too many tracks, too many paths. The next morning I was jolted awake by the sound of shouting. It was Wyatt yelling into the forest like a man possessed. I threw on my coat and rushed outside. That's when I saw a snowman, standing perfectly still at the edge of the woods, facing directly toward the cabin. Clutched in its stick hand was the missing laser gun. Without hesitation, Wyatt raised his rifle and put 3 bullets through the snowman's head. Then he turned around and walked back inside without a word. It's only been a few days since then. But if anything else happens, I'll let you know. Middle school left me with more awkward memories than I'd care to admit, but one in particular still haunts me. It wasn't just weird or uncomfortable. It was deeply unsettling, the kind of experience that clings to you years later, no matter how badly you want to forget. I didn't have many friends back then. Just 3: Nolan, Eli, and Corey. We were the kind of kids who never quite fit in, which made us stick together even tighter. But over time, the dynamic shifted. Eli and I started to pull away from Nolan and Corey, though none of us ever talked about it out loud. That summer, Nolan surprised us by inviting the group to spend a week at his family's summer house in Maine. None of us had even heard of the place, a secluded island somewhere in Casco Bay. Given how private his family always was, it didn't shock us. They were unusual, but that's a whole other story. The car ride was long and tense. I had a cold and kept sneezing, which irritated Nolan's dad, who was clearly a germ freak. Corey and I also argued the whole ride over something silly typical for us. We had to take a ferry to reach the island, and that part was at least a little exciting. The house was small but cozy. It felt like stepping into another reality. I don't know how else to put it. The island itself had a surreal vibe. Everyone seemed to know Nolan. Even strangers on the street greeted him by name. We spent most of our time biking, and for kids our age, that was perfect. On the second day, I noticed my favorite Barcelona snapback was missing. I was heartbroken. It was the only soccer merch I had. Nolan guessed I'd left it on the beach, but I was sure I'd brought it back. I even cried to his dad, who brushed me off and told me not to let something so trivial ruin the trip. So I forced myself to move on. The next day, I realized one of my collectible pens was missing. I was obsessed with pens back then and brought my collection everywhere. Eli said he remembered seeing me holding it on my bike, which made me feel worse. I didn't want to cry again, especially not in front of Nolan's dad, so I said I wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. I woke up around 3 a.m., unable to fall back asleep. While I was tossing and turning, I suddenly heard whispering. It was almost too quiet to hear, but it was definitely there. It sounded like it was coming from Corey's bunk, but I couldn't be sure. I was too scared to say anything, so I stayed quiet and eventually drifted back to sleep. I didn't mention it the next morning. Later that day, while we were playing outside, Corey said he had to use the bathroom. He was gone a while, which was typical, but when I glanced at the house, I saw him staring at us from a second-floor window. That wouldn't have been strange, except the house didn't have a bathroom upstairs. I looked again, and he was gone. I told Nolan's dad I felt sick again, and stayed behind when they went out for dinner. Lying in bed, I kept thinking about what I'd seen, the whispering, the missing things, Corey in the window. Something wasn't right. I got up and searched his duffel bag. What I found made my stomach drop, my Barcelona cap. Then my missing pen. Then a nail clipper my mom had packed, a toothbrush, and even a pair of my underwear. I was horrified. But the worst part was his notebook. I almost wish I hadn't opened it. The pages were filled with disturbing sketches, monsters, violent acts, horrific scenes. Some were so heavily drawn the pencil had ripped through the paper. There were even drawings of me. One showed me nailed to a cross with my legs missing. Toward the end of the notebook, my name appeared over and over. The last page said, "I'll do it tomorrow." Shaking, I showed the notebook to Nolan's dad. He was stunned. He told me to return everything the way I found it. I didn't want to, but I listened. Before putting the notebook back, I tore out one of the pages. Minutes later, he gathered everyone and said there was a family emergency. We had to leave immediately. As we packed, I could feel Corey's stare on my back. I was too afraid to turn around. We drove nonstop back home. Nolan's dad dropped Corey off first, then Nolan and Eli, and finally me. On the ride to my house, he told me not to say anything to my parents, that he'd already spoken to Corey's family, and it would be best to let it go. I nodded, but as soon as I got inside, I broke down and told my parents everything. They were furious. Within minutes, they were on the phone with the police. I showed the page I had taken. That was enough for the police to get a warrant. They found the notebook and most of my missing items, all except the pen. I never saw Corey again. His family moved away. He didn't return to school. I never hung out with Nolan either after that. But just last week, a letter showed up in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was the pen, along with a note that simply read, "I remember everything. Now I'm seriously considering moving." By the time senior year rolled around, I realized I'd spent every spring break stuck on campus. While everyone else jetted off to beaches and booze-fueled getaways, I stayed behind, partly because of money, partly because I just didn't bother. But that final year hit different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed out on something. So I decided it was time to do something, anything, before college ended. I still couldn't afford international travel, but my girlfriend Erin started searching for low-cost options closer to home. She ended up finding this quiet little cabin tucked deep in the woods of Lake County, California. It had an old-school charm, a fireplace, a vintage record player, a hot tub, and absolutely no cell reception. Definitely not a wild beach party, but it felt like the perfect kind of escape. We invited her best friend Zoe and her boyfriend Nick to join us and make it a double-date getaway. None of us had ever done a vacation like this together, so we were excited. The drive was about 2.5 hours. Nick had a ridiculously small Mini Cooper, so the girls had to squeeze in the back. He was weirdly touchy about his car. Every time someone brought it up, he got defensive. Still, it was a convertible, so at least the ride felt breezy. We arrived just after 8 p.m. It was completely dark, and the cabin looked a little creepy with no lights on and trees pressing in from all sides. Still, the inside was cozy. That first night, we hung out by the fire, opened some wine, played board games, and just relaxed. The second night was more lively. We finally convinced Nick to join us in the hot tub, which was in its own screened-in room connected to the back of the cabin. We brought drinks, cranked up some music, and started a game of Never Have I Ever. Everyone was loose, laughing and buzzed. Then a flash of light, blinding and fast, lit up the entire spa room like a lightning strike. But there were no clouds, no thunder, just light. We froze. I turned off the music. No one said anything. I climbed out of the tub and stepped out onto the back deck. All I could see was blackness and forest. Then I heard it, a sharp clicking sound. It came from somewhere deep in the woods. Then another from the opposite direction. Then a third. Seconds later came the whistling, from multiple places at once. It felt like the trees were closing in. I yelled for everyone to get inside. We slammed the door shut and locked everything. Sitting in the living room, soaked and shivering, we tried to come up with explanations. A prank? Locals messing with us? Then came the banging. Someone was pounding on the front door hard. Zoe panicked. Erin was already crying. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and told Nick to call the police. I shouted that I had a gun, a bluff, of course. The pounding stopped. Nick said the cops were on the way, but we were in the middle of nowhere. No clue how long it would take. Everything was silent for a few minutes, until the living room window shattered. A rock crashed through it with so much force it knocked over a lamp. Screams. Glass everywhere. I told everyone to run upstairs and lock themselves in. I stayed downstairs, knife in hand, waiting for someone to try to climb in. But no one came. Instead, I walked to the broken window and picked up the rock. Taped to it was a note, written in jagged black marker, L-E-A-V-A. Minutes later, the police finally arrived. They swept the property, searched the woods, questioned us, but found nothing. No footprints. No people. No explanation. We weren't going to stick around for round 2. We didn't even wait until morning. We packed up and got out of there that same night. The Airbnb host gave us a full refund without hesitation, but completely ignored all of our follow-up messages. Aaron's convinced they knew something, maybe even expected something to happen. It would explain the unusually low price and how far off the grid the place was. As for me, I'm done with quiet remote cabins. Next spring break, I'll take overpriced cocktails.
I'm 31, and I live just outside of Denver. A few weeks ago, I had to drive home late at night after a grueling business trip. It was around midnight, and I'd been on the road for hours. My eyes were heavy, my body aching from sitting for so long. The highway was almost deserted, with only the occasional car speeding by. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of me, and I decided to pull into a rest stop to stretch my legs and wake myself up. The parking lot was eerily quiet. A single streetlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. There were only 2 cars parked there, mine and an old, beat-up minivan sitting at the far end of the lot. It looked abandoned at first, but something about it felt off. I got out of my car, shivering in the cold night air. The silence was heavy, like the world had paused around me. I stretched and yawned, trying to shake off the uneasiness creeping up my spine. That's when I heard it, a faint, muffled sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the nearby trees. But then it grew louder. It sounded like crying. I froze, glancing around the empty lot. The sound was coming from the direction of the minivan. I told myself to ignore it, to get back in my car and drive away. But something about the crying pulled me in. It was soft yet desperate, like a child in distress. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I started walking toward the minivan. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if some invisible force was urging me to turn back. The crying grew clearer, sharper, cutting through the cold night air. When I reached the van, I peered through the back window. My heart sank. There was a child inside, maybe 6 or 7 years old, banging on the glass. His face was streaked with tears, and he looked terrified. I hesitated, my mind racing. Where were his parents? Why was he alone? My gut told me something wasn't right, but I couldn't just leave him there. I reached for the door handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I opened the door cautiously, leaning in just enough to ask, "Hey, are you okay? Where are your parents?" The child didn't answer. He just stared past me, his wide, tear-filled eyes fixed on something behind me. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could turn around, I heard a deep, gravelly voice. "You shouldn't have done that." I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing there was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a hood pulled over his face. In his hand was a crowbar, its metal glinting under the flickering streetlight. Pure panic set in, and I bolted toward my car. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. I could hear his footsteps behind me, heavy and fast. As I reached my car, my hands fumbled with the keys. My fingers were trembling so much I almost dropped them. Just as I got the door unlocked and threw myself inside, he slammed the crowbar against my window. The sound was deafening, and for a split second, I thought the glass would shatter. He raised the crowbar again, yelling something I couldn't make out. I scrambled to start the engine, my entire body shaking. The moment the car roared to life, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as I sped out of the lot, my headlights cutting through the darkness. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, the crowbar hanging at his side, watching me disappear into the night. Once I was a safe distance away, I grabbed my phone and called the police, barely able to get the words out. I told them everything: the crying child, the man with the crowbar, the minivan. They assured me they would send someone to check the rest stop immediately. Later that night, an officer called me back. They found the minivan, but it was empty. No sign of the man or the child. The officer then told me something that made my stomach churn. The minivan matched the description of a vehicle connected to multiple disappearances along the highway. Women traveling alone had been lured in by the sound of a crying child, only to be attacked and never seen again. I was the first one who had managed to get away. I couldn't stop thinking about the child. Was he real? Or was he just part of the trap? I'll never know. But that night changed me forever. I still drive that route occasionally, but I refuse to stop, no matter how tired I am. I don't care if I'm running on fumes or about to fall asleep at the wheel. I'll never pull into a rest stop again. Some nights, when I'm lying in bed, I replay it all in my head. The sound of the crowbar against my window, the man's gravelly voice, the child's terrified face. It's all burned into my memory. And the scariest part, he's still out there, waiting for his next victim. My name's Michael. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. A few months ago, I had to drive out of state for a work conference. It was a 6-hour drive, and since I'd left later than planned, it was already dark when I hit the road. The rain hadn't stopped since noon, making the drive feel even longer. I've always hated driving at night, especially in bad weather. About halfway through my trip, I saw him. A man standing on the side of the road, drenched and shivering, holding out his thumb. His clothes were soaked through, and he looked miserable. Normally, I would have driven right past him. I've never been the kind of person to pick up hitchhikers. It just feels too risky. But something about him made me hesitate. He didn't look threatening. He was thin, maybe in his late 40s, with a pale face and a defeated expression. The rain was pouring so hard I could barely see him as I slowed down. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. As soon as I rolled down the window, he leaned in and stammered, Thank you so much. My car broke down a few miles back. I just need a ride to the next town." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to drive away, but the desperation in his voice made me feel guilty. I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in, dripping water all over the seat. "Thank you," he said again, shivering as he buckled his seatbelt. "I've been out there for hours." "No problem," I replied, forcing a smile. "Where are you headed?" He mentioned a small town about 20 minutes up the road. As we started driving, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Something about him didn't sit right. At first, he made small talk, where I was headed, what I did for work, but his answers about himself were vague. He said his car had broken down, but when I asked what kind of car he drove, he paused for a moment too long before answering. A sit-in. He didn't mention a make or model. The conversation died after that. The only sounds were the rain pounding on the roof and the windshield wipers scraping back and forth. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was staring straight ahead, his hands resting stiffly on his lap. His wet clothes clung to his body, and his breathing sounded uneven. The uneasy feeling grew stronger. I couldn't pinpoint why, but something was off. About 10 minutes later, we passed a gas station. "I'm going to stop here real quick," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He immediately tensed. "Why? Just keep driving. The town isn't far." I forced a laugh. "I need to fill up, and I could use some coffee. It'll only take a minute." "No," he said sharply. "I don't want to stop." That's when the alarm bells in my head started screaming. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and my heart began to race. "I'll just be a second," I said firmly, pulling into the gas station despite his protest. As I parked, he leaned toward me. His voice dropped, and he said, "You're making a mistake." I froze. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. I couldn't tell if it was a threat or a warning. "I'll be right back," I muttered, trying to sound casual. I grabbed my wallet and stepped out of the car, my legs shaking. The gas station clerk, a young guy who looked barely out of high school, greeted me as I walked in. I forced a smile and whispered, "I think the guy in my car is dangerous. Can you call the police?" The clerk's eyes widened, but he nodded and quickly disappeared into the back room. I pretended to browse the snack aisle, keeping an eye on my car. The man was still sitting there, but now he was watching me. His eyes followed my every move, and I felt trapped under his gaze. A few minutes later, 2 police cars pulled into the lot, their lights flashing. As soon as the man saw them, he threw open the passenger door and bolted into the ring. The officers chased after him, and within minutes, they had him in handcuffs. One of them came over to talk to me while the other searched the man. "Are you okay?" the officer asked. "Yeah," I stammered, still shaking. He said his car broke down, but something about him didn't feel right. The officer nodded grimly. "Good instincts. He's been on our radar for a while. He's wanted for the murder of 2 drivers who picked him up on this highway. You're lucky you stopped here." I felt my stomach drop. The man I'd let into my car, who I'd driven for miles, had killed people in my exact situation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't stopped at the gas station. Now, every time I see someone hitchhiking, I feel a pang of guilt. But I reminded myself of that night. No matter how desperate someone looks, I'll never pick up a hitchhiker again. My name is Alex Carter. I'm 28 years old and live in the suburbs of Chicago. I've always been cautious by nature, never the kind of guy to take unnecessary risks. But that night, my judgment failed me. That night, I learned that some roads are better left unexplored. I was driving home after visiting an old friend I hadn't seen in years. The reunion was nice, but it had run later than I'd planned. By the time I got on the road, it was nearing 1 a.m., and I still had over an hour to go. I was exhausted, just trying to stay awake. The route was mostly rural, with long stretches of dark, empty roads. My GPS chimed, instructing me to take a left turn onto a dirt road. I hesitated. The road looked narrow, surrounded by thick woods, and there weren't any streetlights. I considered ignoring it and sticking to the main highway, but I was too tired to argue with the GPS. I turned, my tires crunching against the gravel. As I drove, the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark. My headlights illuminated nothing but trees and dirt. No signs, no landmarks, just isolation. I started to feel uneasy. I'd always heard stories about people going missing on roads like this, but I told myself to stop overthinking. That's when I saw it. A car was parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly. Standing next to it was a man, waving his arms like he was trying to flag me down. My heart rate spiked. He looked desperate, pacing back and forth. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. As I got closer, I noticed the man's clothes were dirty, like he'd been out here for a while. He ran up to my window, yelling something I couldn't hear over the engine. I rolled it down slightly, just enough to catch his words. "Please, my wife's hurt. She's in the car. I need help." His voice cracked, full of panic. Every instinct told me to drive away. Something felt off. But then I thought, what if he's telling the truth? I didn't want to leave someone stranded if they were in real trouble. Reluctantly, I put the car in park and stepped out. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice shaky. "In the back seat," he said, pointing to the car. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the vehicle. The back seat was empty. "Where is she?" I repeated, turning back to him. That's when I noticed his hands. They were trembling, not with fear, but with some kind of suppressed energy, like he was holding back from doing something. Before I could process it, I heard movement behind me. A second man emerged from the woods, holding a crowbar. His face was shadowed, but his intent was clear. Adrenaline kicked in. I bolted back to my car, not even thinking, just running. I heard them shouting behind me, their footsteps pounding against the dirt. I barely managed to fling the door open and slam it shut before the first man reached me. I locked the doors and floored it. Gravel sprayed from my tires as I sped away, the men shrinking in my rearview mirror. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might explode. After what felt like forever, I saw the glow of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, shaking, and ran inside to tell the clerk what had happened. He listened quietly, his expression darkening as I described the dirt road. "That road doesn't lead anywhere," he said. "It's a dead end." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't run. Now, I don't trust GPS blindly anymore. Some roads aren't shortcuts. They're traps.
My name is Emma, and what happened at Morton's dairy farm changed everything I thought I knew about my quiet village. I needed money for college, so I took a job doing night shifts at Morton's farm outside our village in Derbyshire. The pay was good. Too good, really. But Mr. Morton said he needed someone reliable to watch the livestock and check the automated milking systems. Morton was a respected man in our community. Church council member donated to local charities, had owned the farm for 30 years. His son James helped run things during the day. The work seemed easy enough. Walk around the barns every few hours, check the computer systems, make sure nothing was wrong. The farm was modern, everything automated. I mostly just had to be there in case of emergencies. But after a few weeks, I started noticing cars coming and going in the middle of the night. Expensive cars that didn't belong to farming people. They'd park behind the main barn, stay for an hour, then leave. When I asked Mr. Morton about it, he said they were veterinary consultants checking on sick animals. That didn't make sense. The animals all looked healthy to me. One night around 2 a.m., I heard voices coming from the old grain storage building. It was supposed to be empty. Morton had built new storage facilities the year before. I walked over to investigate and saw light coming from under the door. Through a crack in the wood, I could see inside. There were about 15 men in expensive suits sitting on chairs arranged in a circle. In the center was a table with white powder and scales. Money was stacked everywhere. Mr. Morton was there along with James, but so were people I recognized from the village. The bank manager, 2 police officers, even our local MP who lived in the big house on the hill. They were packaging drugs, cocaine from what I could tell, using the farm as a distribution center. I backed away carefully but stepped on a loose board. It creaked loudly. The voices inside stopped talking. I ran back to the main barn and pretended to check on the cows. A few minutes later, James appeared. "Everything all right out here?" he asked, but his eyes were hard, suspicious. "Just doing my rounds," I said, trying to sound normal. The next day, I went to the police station in the next town over. I couldn't trust our local officers. I'd seen 2 of them at that meeting. I told a detective what I'd witnessed, gave him names and details. He took it seriously. Said they'd been investigating drug trafficking in the area but couldn't figure out how it was organized. A legitimate farm operation was the perfect cover. They set up surveillance on the property, but it took weeks to gather enough evidence. Meanwhile, I had to keep working my shifts, pretending I hadn't seen anything. Every night I was terrified someone would realize I knew. Then one evening, Morton pulled me aside. "Emma, I hear you've been asking questions around the village," he said quietly. "About the farm, about visitors we have." My blood went cold. Someone had told him I was talking. "I'm just doing my job," I said. "I know you are, but some jobs require more discretion than others. You understand?" He was threatening me. This man I'd known since childhood, who taught me to drive a tractor when I was 15. That night I called the detective and told him I couldn't wait any longer. They had to move now. The raid happened 3 days later. Police surrounded the farm at 1 a.m. when the next meeting was scheduled. They caught the entire operation. Morton, James, the bank manager, both police officers, and 12 others, including the MP. They found £2 million worth of cocaine, detailed financial records, and evidence the operation had been running for 5 years. The farm's legitimate business was just cover for moving drugs across the country. Morton had been using his reputation in the community to stay above suspicion. No one questioned why successful businessmen visited his farm at night. They assumed it was normal agricultural business. The whole thing made national news. Our quiet village was suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. 14 people were convicted, including the 2 corrupt police officers. Morton got 12 years. James got 8. I finished college with the reward money the police gave me for helping break the case. But I moved away from the village afterward. Too many people there blame me for destroying families, for bringing shame on the community. The farm was sold to new owners who actually use it for farming. But I learned something important from all this. Criminals aren't always strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes they're the people everyone trusts, hiding in plain sight in places you'd never think to look. When something feels wrong, it usually is, even if the person involved seems respectable, even if everyone else thinks they're wonderful. My name is Tom, and I need to tell someone what really happened at Riverside Farm before the police closed the case. I was hired as a farmhand last October. The owner, David Hartwell, seemed normal when we met. Middle-aged guy, friendly enough. He offered good money and a place to stay in his old farmhouse. I needed work badly after losing my job in Manchester, so I said yes. The farm was isolated, 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by thick woods. David lived alone in the main house while I got a small room upstairs. He said his wife had died years ago and his grown kids never visited anymore. For the first month, everything was fine. I fed the cattle, fixed fences, helped with harvests. David was quiet but treated me well. Paid on time, cooked decent meals. I thought I'd found the perfect job. Then I started noticing the smell. It came from the old barn at the back of the property. David always kept it locked and said it was just storage. But the smell got worse every day. Sweet and rotten, like meat left out in the sun. When I asked about it, David's whole mood changed. "Stay away from that barn," he said. His voice was different, cold. "That's not your concern." A few days later, I was fixing a water pipe near the barn when I heard something moving inside. Not rats or birds, something bigger. And then I heard what sounded like crying. Very quiet, but definitely human. I tried the door, but it was locked with 3 different padlocks. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that sound. About David's reaction when I asked questions. The next morning, David was gone. Left a note saying he had business in town and would be back in 2 days. This was my chance. I found a crowbar in the tool shed and broke the locks. The smell hit me like a wall when I opened the door. Inside was dark, but I could see a trapdoor in the floor. That's where the smell was coming from. I lifted the trapdoor and nearly threw up. Below was a small concrete room, maybe 8 feet square, and inside was a girl, maybe 16 or 17, chained to the wall. She was alive but barely conscious, thin, dirty, terrified. "Please," she whispered when she saw me, "please help me." I got her out of there immediately, called the ambulance and police while she drank water and ate some bread. Her name was Sarah Mills. She'd been missing for 8 months. Her family lived in Leeds and thought she was dead. She told me David had taken 3 other girls over the years, kept them in that room for months before killing them. She only survived because she was small and could make herself useful cleaning his house during the day. He was planning to kill her soon and bring someone new. When the police searched the property, they found the remains of 4 other girls buried in the woods behind the barn. All young, all reported missing from different towns over the past 5 years. David came back that evening and found police cars everywhere. He tried to run but crashed his truck into a tree 2 miles down the road, broke his neck and died instantly. Sarah is alive and back with her family now. The other families finally got answers about what happened to their daughters. The case made national news for weeks. I still have nightmares about that smell, about thinking how many times I walked past that barn without knowing someone was trapped inside calling for help. If I hadn't heard her crying that day, Sarah would be dead too. The farm is empty now, for sale, but nobody wants it. I moved back to the city and got a job in a warehouse. I'll never work on an isolated farm again. Sometimes people ask me how I knew something was wrong. The truth is, I almost didn't check. I almost minded my own business like David wanted. That's what scares me most. How close evil can be to normal life, and how easy it is to miss if you're not paying attention. My name is Mark, and I survived something at Blackwood Hunting Lodge that still gives me nightmares. I took a groundskeeper job at a private hunting lodge in the Scottish Highlands. The owner, Richard Ashford, was a wealthy businessman from London who used the place for weekend hunting trips with his friends. The lodge was huge and isolated, surrounded by dense forest. Richard seemed normal enough when he hired me. Polite, well-dressed, talked about traditional hunting. My job was simple: maintain the grounds and help prepare for guests. For the first month, everything seemed fine. Richard would come up with groups of older, wealthy men for weekend hunts. They'd go out with rifles and come back with deer or rabbits. Normal stuff. But then I noticed something odd. They'd leave with huge amounts of equipment for day hunts, but always came back empty-handed. No game, no trophies. Yet they were always excited, laughing and congratulating each other. One day, while cleaning Richard's office, I accidentally knocked over a folder, photographs scattered everywhere. At first, I thought they were normal hunting photos, men posing with their kills. But the kills weren't animals, they were people. Young hikers and campers lying dead while Richard and his friends posed with rifles, grinning like they'd just won a prize. Dozens of photos going back years. I heard footsteps and quickly put the photos back. Richard walked in, watching me carefully. "Everything all right, Mark?" he asked. That night, I saw trucks leaving the lodge toward the restricted forest area. I tried calling police, but the signal was weak. I managed to report what I'd found before the line died. The next morning, Richard came to my cabin with 2 armed friends. "We need to talk," he said. They took me deep into the forest where they had a camp set up. 3 young backpackers were tied to trees, 2 men and a woman terrified and gagged. "Hunting animals gets boring," Richard explained calmly. "No real challenge, but people run, hide, fight back. It's the ultimate sport." They'd been doing this for 15 years. capturing hikers in remote areas, then hunting them through the forest. Police thought these people just got lost in the wilderness. They untied one of the captives and gave him a 10-minute head start. Then they grabbed their rifles and followed. 3 hours later, they came back dragging his body. "Your turn tomorrow," Richard told me. But that night, police helicopters appeared overhead. My phone call had gotten through. Armed officers surrounded the camp just as they were preparing the next hunt. All 6 men were arrested. Richard tried claiming self-defense, but the photos proved everything. Police found evidence of 20 murders over 15 years. The whole group got life sentences. The 2 surviving captives recovered physically, though the trauma stays with them. I testified at trial and described everything I witnessed. The hunting lodge was demolished. The land is protected forest now. I work in a town library these days, somewhere busy where I can see people coming and going. I learned that evil can hide behind expensive clothes and polite conversation. And I'll never ignore my instincts again, no matter how crazy they seem.
I wasn't the type to get sentimental over high school, but flipping through my freshly printed yearbook brought back a weird mix of nostalgia and relief. Graduation was only a few days away, and I was more than ready to move on. I was lying on my bed, absent-mindedly scanning the pages, laughing at dumb inside jokes scribbled by my friends. That's when I noticed something off. There was a picture from the homecoming game, one of those wide shots capturing the student section. Something about the crowd made me squint. There, in the back, barely visible but unmistakable, was a man. He wasn't cheering, wasn't even dressed like a student or a parent. He just stood there, slightly blurred, like he wasn't supposed to be in the shot. I flipped a few more pages. Another candid, this one from a pep rally. My stomach sank. He was there again, standing in the back near the gym doors. Same blank expression, same posture. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe a teacher, a staff member. But something about him felt wrong. I turned the pages faster now, scanning random photos. There he was at the senior bonfire. A group of students were laughing, their faces illuminated by the flames, and just outside the firelight's reach, the man stood watching. No one acknowledged him. No one even seemed to notice he was there. I felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't until I reached the group photos that the unease turned to outright fear. I found the picture of me and my friends, taken on the last day of school. We were all standing in front of the lockers, arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiling. But right behind us, slightly out of focus, was the man. He was standing directly behind me. And this time, he was smiling too. A cold shiver ran through my body. I slammed the yearbook shut. My heart was racing, but I kept telling myself it was some weird editing mistake. Maybe someone photoshopped him in as a joke. Maybe it was just some random guy who had been around and no one noticed. I tried to put it out of my head. That night, while packing for college, my phone buzzed with a text. I assumed it was one of my friends making plans for graduation, but when I checked the screen, my stomach dropped. Unknown number. See you at graduation. I just stared at it, my hands suddenly clammy. My brain fought between wanting to dismiss it as a prank and the overwhelming dread creeping up my spine. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I didn't sleep much that night. Every shadow in my room felt too dark, every sound too sharp. I even checked the locks twice before finally forcing myself to lie down. The next day at school, I asked around. No one else seemed to notice the man in the yearbook. Not my friends, not the teachers. Even the yearbook staff had no idea who I was talking about. They pulled up the raw files, and in the original shots, he wasn't there. But in the printed copies, he was. I tried to brush it off, to pretend none of it mattered. Graduation day came, and the whole ceremony felt like a blur. It wasn't until after I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, that I saw him again, standing at the very back of the auditorium. He was grinning, and this time he raised his hand, just slightly, and waved. I left town the next morning. I don't know who he was, and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I still get messages from an unknown number. I never answer them. I still think about this night sometimes. Even years later, the memory creeps back when I least expect it. I was never the kind of person to believe in the paranormal, but what happened at my college graduation made me question everything. It was a warm evening, and the ceremony was being held outdoors on the university's football field. Rows of white chairs stretched across the grass, each filled with anxious graduates dressed in identical caps and gowns. I was sitting toward the middle, waiting for my name to be called. The air buzzed with nervous excitement. Occasional bursts of laughter, the murmurs of students whispering to each other. The occasional call of a professor reminding us to stay in line. At first, it was just a passing observation, something my brain registered but didn't dwell on. A girl, sitting at the very end of the row. She was wearing a cap and gown like the rest of us, but something about her was off. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost grayish under the stadium lights. And she sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't fidget, didn't whisper to anyone, didn't even seem to blink. I kept stealing glances at her, feeling a weird sense of unease. It wasn't just her stillness. It was the way no one else seemed to acknowledge her. The students on either side of her left a noticeable gap, as if they were unconsciously avoiding sitting too close. The name-calling continued. One by one, students walked up, shook hands with the dean, and took their diplomas. Cheers erupted with every name, parents, friends, classmates all clapping, shouting. But she never reacted, never clapped, never turned her head to watch. Then, it happened. The announcer cleared his throat and read a name. Anna Holloway. Silence. No claps, no cheers, not a single sound. I looked around, expecting someone to call out or react, but no one did. The announcer hesitated, shifting uncomfortably at the microphone, as if realizing something was wrong. Then, after an awkward pause, he quickly moved on to the next name, and the moment passed as if it had never happened. But I couldn't let it go. The name felt familiar, and that girl, she still hadn't moved. A strange sensation crawled up my spine, and for the first time, I noticed something else. The wind had been blowing all night, making our gowns ripple slightly as we sat. But hers didn't move at all. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I barely registered my own name being called, my legs feeling stiff as I walked across the stage. The only thing I could focus on was her. Every time I glanced back, she was still there, still staring forward. After the final name was called and the hats were tossed into the air, I found myself scanning the crowd, searching for her, but she was gone. I hadn't seen her stand. I hadn't seen her leave. She had just vanished. Something about it gnawed at me. Maybe it was my brain trying to rationalize what I saw, or maybe it was pure unease, but I needed to know. After the ceremony, I approached one of the faculty members, an older professor who had been handing out the diplomas. I asked him, as casually as I could, who Anna Holloway was. His reaction was instant. His expression darkened, his mouth opened slightly like he wanted to say something but stopped himself. Then, after a pause, he gave a small shake of his head. She wasn't on the list. I laughed nervously, thinking he misunderstood. No, I heard her name announced. She was sitting at the end of the row. Pale girl, black hair, really quiet. The professor stared at me for a long time. Then, in a hushed voice, he said, Anna Holloway was supposed to graduate 5 years ago. She died in a car accident a week before the ceremony. A cold, heavy weight settled in my stomach. That can't be right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I saw her. She was there. I swear. He only shook his head. I don't know what you saw, but she wasn't on the list. I left without another word. That night, I searched the university's records, digging through old class rosters. And there it was. Anna Holloway, class of 2018. My hands felt clammy as I clicked on an old article. The headline sent a chill down my spine. Tragic accident claims life of promising student days before graduation. Anna had been driving home late from a study session when her car skidded on black ice and flipped into a ditch. She had died instantly. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The girl I saw at graduation, her pale skin, her motionless posture, the way no one sat too close to her. It all made sense now. I closed my laptop, trying to push away the growing fear inside me. Maybe it had been a mistake. Maybe I imagined her. Maybe I was just tired. But then I remembered the silence. Every single student received cheers, claps, whistles. Except for her, somewhere deep down, I knew. I had seen her. She had been there. And no one noticed. Except me. Graduation night had always been billed as a moment of triumph and celebration. A time to mark the end of college life and the beginning of something new. I'd remember the buzz of excitement as I donned my cap and gown, the lingering sense of perfume and sweat in the crowded auditorium, and the applause that reverberated off the walls as names were called. After the ceremony, the building emptied out quickly. Most of my classmates had already gone off to their parties or family gatherings, leaving the auditorium quiet and strangely empty. I was among the last to leave, reluctant to let go of the moment. It wasn't until I reached my car that I realized I'd left my phone charger behind. I cursed my forgetfulness. My phone was already dangerously close to dying, and I needed it for directions home. With no other option, I decided to return to the auditorium, a building that still held the echoes of the ceremony and the nervous energy of our last moments as students. Entering the auditorium again felt different in the fading light. The main hall, once brimming with life, now lay in near silence, illuminated only by a few dim emergency lights. The janitor, an older man whose tired eyes and slow, deliberate movements told of years spent alone in these halls, was busy sweeping confetti from the stage. His presence was oddly comforting in a place that otherwise felt abandoned. I retraced my steps back to my seat in the second row, where I remembered leaving my charger. With each step, I noticed the eerie hush that contrasted sharply with the celebratory chaos of just hours before. The silence was punctuated only by the soft rustle of my sneakers against the cold floor and the distant hum of the building settling. As I knelt down, reaching for my charger, a strange heaviness in the air made my skin crawl. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate sound that didn't match my own movements. I froze. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, echoing across the stage in a slow, measured pace. I glanced up toward the stage and saw a figure standing in the center. Dressed in a cap and gown identical to mine, the person was facing away, standing unnaturally still as if caught in a moment that defied time. At first, I thought it must be another student who'd forgotten something. A friend perhaps lost in thought or caught in the nostalgia of the night. Summoning the courage to speak, I called out, "Hey, did you forget something?" My voice wavered in the silence, uncertain if it would be met with an answer. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The figure remained motionless, and the janitor continued his slow sweep along the stage, seemingly oblivious to the strange occurrence. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, came the words. "Did they say my name? I felt my heart sink into my stomach. That voice, it was hauntingly familiar. I remember the news from last summer. A student from our class had died in a tragic accident. Rumors had swirled, and the memory of that friend, whose name was never formally announced during the ceremony, had been seared into my mind. Now, before me, stood someone who should not have been there. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what I was witnessing. The figure slowly turned its head, revealing a face that was unsettlingly blank, a face that seemed to be caught between life and something else. I couldn't tell if the eyes held remorse or if they were simply empty. I asked again, voiced barely above a whisper, "Are you okay?" But the figure did not respond with a reassuring nod or a simple yes. Instead, that chilling whisper repeated, "Did they say my name?" The repetition sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation, a plea, and a summons all at once. Paralysis gripped me. Every instinct screamed to flee, to run out of that building as fast as possible. Yet I stood rooted to the spot, transfixed by the unspeakable horror before me. Finally, as if the weight of dread had been too much to bear, I turned and bolted from the auditorium. I barely noticed if the janitor or any other presence was following. My only thought was escape. Outside, the cool night air never felt so welcoming as it did in that frantic moment. I didn't stop until I was safely in my car, the engine's hum a small comfort in the midst of my racing heart and frantic thoughts. I left the charger behind on that cold, empty floor, along with something else I wished I could forget. The next day, I returned to the auditorium. Half to recover my charger, half to understand what I'd witnessed. The room was as I had left it, but the charger was nowhere to be found. It was as if it had vanished into thin air, leaving only the unsettling memory of that encounter behind. To this day, I'm left with a lingering question and an unshakable sense of dread. Was it a trick of the light, my exhausted mind, or something far more sinister? A restless spirit seeking recognition on what was supposed to be a joyous night? I may never know the full truth, and perhaps that is for the best. The memory of that whispered question continues to haunt me, an eerie reminder that some moments should remain unexplained.